ATTP is the Department for Architecture Theory and Philosophy of Technics. But in much of our work, we actually try to find out is what these two terms can mean today, what their promise is, what their promise can be. And at the core of it is somehow how to think of theory in a way that is not totally being consumed by being handy for problem solving, because the way of putting something at stake matters as much as any kind of solutions. For theory, what we observe today many times is that theory enters a kind of a short circuit with consumption. So it tries to expose drastic profiles of things. It tries to trigger short-term effects. It tries to mobilize and move and also emotionalize in a kind of a journalistic agitation discourse. And all of this is, of course, valid and belongs very much to our time. When I applied for this chair here, I was speaking of us living in a time of digital sophistics, which was not at all meant in an entirely pejorative sense, but rather in a sense in which a lot of institutionalized stable structures are being socialized in ways that have not yet been institutionalized or are not perhaps ever going to be institutionalized as we know it. And this is a situation quite similar to the Renaissance. So sophistics, which comes with new tools, with templates, with forms, with an access of knowledge and know-how across and beyond the fields of professionality, let's say, as they were established. Theory plays a key role in that, so in triggering change, in facilitating interdisciplinarity, multidisciplinarity, translations of knowledges and so on. But it also triggers a kind of a consumptive attitude towards it. So very often theory wants to be active, to relate to action. And what comes out is something that people have theorized again in quite apt terms, something like a society of spectacle. So a stance of being entertained by critical diagnosis. And this again feeds back into a certain stance of consumption. So what we try to figure out in this interplay, philosophy of techniques, which is with practices, which is with technique, not so much technology, and theory of architecture, is to relate theory to something like invariances. So that there are things which remain invariant, and what we can learn from engaging with theoretical thought is not so much positions positions or arguments, but really stances, Haltungen, towards situations of change that have always driven people to think. So we can learn how to think from learning how to read, how other people have learned to think. So this is, in a way, at the core of much of what we do. This also means that theory is, even so, it literally means theoria, so to envision, to visualize. It's informed much more by musical keys, by acoustics, by frequencies, by what is called the harmonic thinking. And this does not mean that one seeks harmony, but it means that one plays with harmonics, with constellations, rather than thinking in images, pictures, and drawings primarily for theory. We have one motto from the early days of ATTP, which is still valid. We put, because of all this background, one scenario at the center of it, which is that of the convivio, so a symposium, much in the sense in which Dante, this early Renaissance polymath, wrote a beautiful text that used the situation of a symposium to engender novel vernaculars, to address the shifts of authority that happened in early Renaissance from the classical institutions to the New World spirit, if one wants. So the motto we chose is that thinking is a feast that consists in exhausting oneself, on striving not to consume any of the abundant dishes one finds set on the table. The Department of Architecture, Theory and Philosophy of Technics considers the 2,000 years old tradition of architectonic treatise as a plentiful banquet where one can experience that and how thinking can be learned. Here we can instruct ourselves in how to formulate and articulate an abstract stance with regards to the grand themes of our own time, namely the Anthropocene, humanism, post-humanism, digital humanism, climate and sustainability, responsibility and globalization. In short, the role of architecture in relation to power, politics, economy, techniques, values, art and knowledge. To speak at such a virtual symposium now, it primarily also addresses the situation of teaching outside of a particular field of discipline. So it's teaching at the mixed table, so to speak. And it's a table where one is not at home. That is both important. Because in this sense, a symposium is not a discourse. It is not about an entirely secular exchange of arguments about ideas, as we have it in discourses, running forth and back, changing positions, taking other points of views. That is all very much part of it, but it's not it. At the symposium, so the tradition goes, there is always something inconceivable present as well, whether one refers to this as the gods or as nature or as whatever kind of powers, does not matter that much. But something that is not entirely within the social avail, let's say, remains present in a symposium. So there are rituals of exchange that involve grace and gratitude as much as critical inquiry. Another way to put this perhaps would be that the symposium affirms that trauma is inescapable. Human beings are finite beings, so we cannot fancy us to be whole. But it's not a trauma in the sense of individual biographies. So at the banquet, the table is set here. And yet, everyone who is there co-directs what happens. So it's about how not to just consume what is given, but rather to invent how to render back. How to render back in kind. So that means how to establish proportion that spans between a particular event across times, between you as an invitee and whatever the host is as an inviter, through inventing vernaculars, spoken tongues, that can facilitate a socialization that tempers a particular moment in time, a sense of a Gegenwart. So it's about entirely being here in the present through thinking of tomorrow and of yesterday. It's about finding words and making kin with them. This is what we imagine as objective vernaculars that architecture theory conjoined with philosophy of techniques might perhaps help to develop.